In the vast and turbulent landscape of the Crusades, there are episodes that, despite their impact and drama, remain buried under the weight of great battles and more famous names. One such episode is the Siege of Nablus, an unexpected rebellion in the heart of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, which put royal authority to the test and revealed internal tensions that threatened to corrode the kingdom from within. While chroniclers of the time focused on epic clashes like Montgisard or Hattin, this urban uprising, led by discontented lords and smothered by central power, was gradually relegated to the margins of the official narrative. In this video, we will relive this forgotten rebellion, which took place in one of the most strategic centers of the kingdom, the city of Nablus, and understand how Baldwin IV, the leper king, responded to this internal threat. Amid broken alliances, exemplary punishments, and the political astuteness of a monarch debilitated by disease yet firm in his mission, we will uncover the details of an episode that nearly fractured the foundation of Frankish power in the Holy Land. Watch until the end and discover how a city, a revolt, and an unyielding response shaped the delicate balance of the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem. In the 12th century, the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem was a fragile political construct built upon territories conquered during the First Crusade. Ruled by Frankish nobles, the kingdom lived under constant threat from the surrounding Islamic powers, especially the Zengids and later Saladin. Internally, however, the challenges were no smaller. Rivalries among barons, disputes over regency, and tensions between noble factions compromised the cohesion of power. It was in this tense atmosphere that Baldwin, still very young and already marked by leprosy, ascended the throne, facing not only external enemies, but also betrayals and rebellions within his own domain. The rebellion in Nablus began around the year 1177, at a time when the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem was still celebrating the unexpected victory against Saladin at Montgisard. However, stability was only apparent. The city of Nablus, located in the hills of Samaria, was a vital point both for its strategic value and for its political symbolism. It belonged to the powerful family of Amalric of Nesle, Count of Jaffa, and was under the influence of certain factions discontent with the central government. Baldwin, still young and ill, ruled under the shadow of his disease, but showed a precocious maturity and a surprising political sense. His throne, however, was constantly challenged by internal disputes among nobles. Among these nobles, one figure stood out in particular: Philip of Milly, a former lord of Nablus, whose loyalty to the kingdom was beginning to be questioned. Although there are no explicit records that Philip personally led the rebellion, his ties to the city and to dissident nobles made him a central figure in the plot. The insurrection began when a local garrison refused to obey direct orders from Jerusalem, claiming that the royal decrees violated the region's ancient customs and privileges. This legalist resistance was quickly fueled by lords who saw in Baldwin a weak monarch, physically incapacitated and therefore vulnerable to manipulation or replacement. The city closed itself around the rebels, expelling royal representatives and preparing to resist a siege. But the young king did not hesitate. Baldwin saw in the rebellion not just a challenge to his authority, but a direct threat to the stability of the Latin kingdom. He summoned the Haute Cour, the Council of Barons, and presented the case firmly. Many nobles hesitated to support armed action against other Christians, especially in a city considered part of the kingdom's backbone. But Baldwin was incisive. If internal disobedience were not crushed, the kingdom would become easy prey for Saladin's armies. With the course of action decided, Baldwin personally marched to Nablus, even though the advanced signs of leprosy were already hindering his mobility. With him went not only royal troops, but also the symbolic support of the church, which saw the rebellion as an affront to the divine order represented by the authority of the anointed king. The siege was swift but intense. The walls of Nablus, though well defended, did not withstand the siege by well-organized and motivated forces. The city's weak artillery was no match for the siege engines brought from Jerusalem. Within a few days, the local garrison began to give in, and the leaders of the revolt tried to negotiate surrender in exchange for pardon. Baldwin, however, sought to make an example. The main instigators were arrested and taken to Jerusalem. Some were publicly executed, others had their lands confiscated. Baldwin took a rare measure. He abolished certain seigneurial privileges of the city and turned Nablus into a direct domain of the crown, a decision that sent a clear message to any other noble tempted by disloyalty. William of Tyre, Archbishop and chronicler of the kingdom, wrote that Baldwin, despite his visible affliction, possessed the heart of a full king, and the episode of Nablus is proof of that courage. By suppressing the rebellion with severity, but without resorting to indiscriminate slaughter, he managed to restore royal authority while preserving the Christian fabric of the kingdom. The Siege of Nablus went almost unnoticed by the major chronicles of the time, overshadowed by the wars against Saladin and the intrigues of succession. Nevertheless, its importance is indisputable. It was a moment when the survival of the kingdom depended not on the battlefield against the Saracens, but on internal resolve in the face of disobedience. Baldwin demonstrated there that his leprosy did not make him any less capable of ruling. On the contrary, his determination and severity were fundamental qualities for preserving the political integrity of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. With the victory at Nablus, Baldwin not only consolidated his position as sovereign, but inaugurated a new phase in the exercise of royal authority within the Latin Kingdom. The message was clear. The unity of the kingdom would be maintained at any cost, and even those who believed themselves protected by ancient feudal rights or family alliances were subject to the sword of royal justice. This episode, though silenced in the grand, heroic accounts of the Crusades, marked a critical turning point in the balance between crown and nobility in the Holy Land. The consequences of the siege were felt throughout the kingdom. Several lords, upon learning of the king's unrelenting response to the rebellion, began to reassess their political positions. Some, like Humphrey of Turon and Raymond of Tripoli, who until then had maintained an ambiguous stance, drew closer to the king, seeking to avoid the fate of the barons of Nablus. The court, which frequently split into rival factions, especially between supporters of the House of Courtenay and the followers of Queen Mother Agnes of Courtenay, began to reconfigure itself in light of the young leper king's show of strength. Baldwin, aware that military victory alone was not enough, invested in political measures to ensure post-rebellion stability. He re-established the authority of loyal officials in the region of Nablus, promoting less powerful but more faithful knights to administrative positions. This policy of centralization and bureaucratic renewal aimed to reduce the power of the great fiefs, which often acted as kingdoms within the kingdom. One cannot ignore the religious aspect of this response. The rebellion, in the eyes of the clergy, was not just an act of political insubordination, but also a rupture with divine order. Baldwin, who cultivated an image of an anointed king, protected by God even in his illness, received unconditional support from figures such as Patriarch Heraclius and abbots of the main religious orders of Jerusalem. The repression was, therefore, wrapped in a discourse of purification. The city had been stained by pride and disobedience and was now purified by steel and penance. In public processions, the population of Jerusalem was called to pray for the reconciliation of Christians and for unity in the face of the infidel threat. The impact of the rebellion, however, was not limited to the kingdom's internal affairs. Saladin, always alert to the weaknesses of his enemies, took note of the disturbances in Nablus and for a brief moment considered exploiting this instability. Muslim sources suggest that spies from Damascus even attempted to contact dissidents within the Latin Kingdom, but the speed and firmness of Baldwin's response prevented any external interference. The Siege of Nablus, in this sense, strengthened the king's prestige even in the eyes of his adversaries. Saladin would go on to treat Baldwin with respect and caution, even when the monarch's disease was already in an advanced stage. Even so, the episode left political scars. Some lords, though defeated, continued to harbor resentment. One of them was Baldwin III of Edessa, a distant relative of the king, who saw Baldwin's centralization as a direct threat to the autonomy of the great nobles. Over time, these tensions would give rise to new internal disputes, especially after Baldwin's disease worsened and he made decisions regarding successors and regents. The rebellion of Nablus, in this sense, was a momentary victory, but also a harbinger of conflicts that would come with even greater force. The city of Nablus, for its part, would never again regain the political prominence it had before the rebellion. Transformed into a direct domain of the crown, it lost much of its economic and military influence. Baldwin appointed a trusted knight named Gerard of Riedfort to govern it, the same who, years later, would become Grand Master of the Templars and be involved in catastrophic decisions, such as confronting Saladin at Hattin. But at that time, Gerard was seen as a faithful servant of the king, and his appointment aimed to seal the region's loyalty. The people of Nablus themselves, largely Eastern Christian, found themselves divided between obedience to the Latin crown and resentment over the punishments. Many were forced to pay heavy fines, and some families lost properties to nobles allied with the king. However, Baldwin avoided an ethnic or religious repression, maintaining the local clergy and preserving churches and monasteries, a gesture that helped to calm tensions in the following months. In the end, the Siege of Nablus was a microcosm of Baldwin's broader struggle to keep united a kingdom surrounded by enemies, corroded by internal disputes, and weakened by the very physical condition of its monarch. It was there, among narrow walls and scorching fields, that the leper king showed that his leadership was not a product of chance or heredity, but of an iron will and a vision of state that transcended his bodily limitations. A moment forgotten by the textbooks, but unforgettable for those who understand the foundations of Christian resistance in the Holy Land. The story of the Siege of Nablus is a powerful reminder that great empires do not fall only under the weight of external enemies, but also through the internal cracks that silently open. Baldwin, the leper king, faced in Nablus not a battle against Muslims, but against his own barons, and he won. The repression of the rebellion showed the world that this sick young man was not a puppet of ambitious nobles, but a monarch capable of acting with rigor and justice, even when it meant confronting his own. By ensuring the unity of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem at that delicate moment, Baldwin not only prevented political fragmentation, but also strengthened the image of Christian royalty before its adversaries. His firm response in Nablus served as a rehearsal for the even greater dilemmas to come, laying the groundwork for tough decisions that would define the destiny of the kingdom in the years ahead. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a little-known episode of Crusade history, like the video, share it with friends who also love medieval history, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of the incredible saga of Baldwin, the Leper King.